Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I find myself on the verge of giggliness for some reason, but my partner, Kohenet Matan, welcome. She assures me it's a fine way to start this episode 17, and I guess it's better than being too serious or depressed. So here we are. I think the reason I'm laughing is that we have just discussed what we'd like to discuss today. And there are so many topics, and some are interrelated and some are all over the place. But we did finally, I think, kind of settle on one very small topic, which is none of them are, of course, which is who do we consider experts, both in the realm of research and just in general in the culture, and why? And so we want to track some of that and talk about that. Whose opinions do we privilege? Go, Anne.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, now I feel like, well, where do we even start? So one of the reasons this topic came up today is that I was just watching the recording of Devora and Monica on Instagram Live talking about what would Lilith do, and this topic sort of came up there of patriarchal. We were talking about interpretation and who gets to interpret artifacts, who gets to interpret writings, who gets to interpret history, and how like the significant impact of the interpreter on the material. And we're challenging, I brought up that in academia, especially in the Western world, we are taught foundational information, philosophy, psychology, history, and the experts that we are offered, the texts that we're reading are mostly, well, when I went to school, it was almost entirely texts written by white men, and therefore interpretations of all of those modalities, history, psychology, philosophy, by white men. And there's this question of like, what would the world look like? Like, what would society look like if its foundations were based on expertise and knowledge from a more diverse group of experts? And especially like if there had been more women's voices, if there had been more people of color's voices, if there had been more non-cis voices, what would the mainstream, would there be a mainstream, and what would that look like? And yeah, and my personal struggles in academia, trying to find myself in the material, and also trying to figure out where is my own expertise, which is really what sparked this. Because I said something about, I feel sort of conditioned that I think I've come up with some great idea, and then I find out that someone said it a long time ago, and I feel deflated, like, oh, it wasn't my idea, it's not worth anything. And Devora has a different experience of that. Do you want to share?
Yeah, where during my dissertation I had a revelation, a real big aha moment that affected all my work from that point on. And when I read it in another source, I was very excited that, as I said to Annie, I was on the right path or the right track. And she then asked the wonderful question of, why is there just one right track? Why are we relying on what path is that, and who lays it out? And I think that's a critical question. I just want to add, you mentioned a few disciplines, but I also think the arts
Yes.
culture is so critical because that's where our symbol language comes from. And so we were talking about Venus of Willendorf and other goddess figures from ancient times, going back even Venus of Laussel 30,000 years ago and more, and how some men might interpret that, and perhaps some women, because these are very full-bodied, naked women and broad hips, and they represent fecundity and fertility, both of the mother goddess and the land. But we know that for some, these will be interpreted as vulgar or lewd, or in today's terminology, even pornographic, and it's so ludicrous. But again, these interpretations, and like seeing a goddess figurine in a museum and having it be labeled as a fertility figure or a doll, it's just really important to know that there are so many interpretations, and we need more of them, and we need to not just be relying on a male or female patriarchally informed view. and gaze.
Okay, can you come back to this fertility figure thing? Because you've talked about this a few times and I am ignorant and I want to be educated here. So first of all, I understand that there's a diminutiveness. What is the word? There's a minimizing of the power of the feminine figure when it gets diminished to just a fertility figure.
Right.
And
What's wrong with that?
yeah, like there's a part of me that's like, well, what if they were praying to this figure for fertility for,
Absolutely.
themselves or the land? Isn't that also an aspect of goddess worship?
And very important. And also, we think that some of these figures would have been held perhaps while a mother or woman was in childbirth for protection, for safety of the birth. And so, although that has a different connotation, you wouldn't necessarily call that fertility. But yes, definitely praying to a divine figure for help with getting pregnant and having a safe pregnancy and birth. Very valid, very important. But yes, we think that if you're talking about a mother goddess who created everything, then it's diminutive just to focus on that one aspect.
Right.
Yeah. So, and not use the word divine, let's say. Or something.
Right. Okay. So not acknowledging, so calling it a fertility doll or idol rather than saying this is a, I don't know, would effigy be a correct word? Like this is a,
Oh,
not
yeah.
really
Representation, symbol.
representation of the divine feminine in this particular, which like may have been related to fertility rites.
And just have more context, I think,
Right.
rather than a 2 or 3 words next to the piece. And this is
Right.
a common mistake in museums. Yeah.
And what's the contrast? Let's just like name that. So if there was, some Egyptian god figure, for example, what do those descriptions look like in contrast, and how much more nuance do we see for the divine masculine as opposed to the divine feminine?
I think probably, I'm guessing, I don't know this for sure, I'm certainly not a curator, but that I would imagine more museums would not hesitate to name something an Egyptian god or Hittite god. But when it's a goddess, then we're often seeing words like female figurine.
Yeah. Female figurine.
Yeah, very different. Also, I think it's important for people to know the context of a figure being like this, hands raised up, palms out, or holding the breasts, which often signifies either a worshiper, a priestess, or a deity.
Okay. And you mentioned that in the What Would Lilith Do? And I want to know, what is the origin of, like, how do we know that this, because to me this is like supplication. So I'm curious about, like, how do we know this is a goddess, this or this, right. Or this are goddess poses?
I think we know it from perhaps some of the liturgy, maybe from the repetition of where these figures were found and the repetition of the pose. And I think also from the scholars who have been so largely ignored by the mainstream academy. Marija Gimbutas certainly being one of the major figures, Zechrono Livracha and Ibaye. And she wrote,
may her memory be for a blessing.
Yeah, thank you. And the Goddesses and Gods of Old Europe is one of her famous works, but she's written a huge amount of scholarship, and there is now, thanks to Joan Marler, an Institute of Archaeomythology, which centers on Marija's work. There's a bit of video, a lot of analysis of her writings, and some of her writing, I think, certainly a bibliography. And because she, in creating the field archaeomythology, she felt that no civilization could be fully understood or known without looking at all these disciplines: literature, arts, culture, music, archaeology, anthropology, sociology, I mean, you name it, that you would need to study all those things. And we tend to isolate those fields, and then you can't get a clear picture of what was going on in a culture.
It's funny, if our topic today is who are the experts, and well, clearly Marija Gimbutas, is that who you say?
Yeah.
Clearly she is or was, and when you say, what that her perspective was that you couldn't learn about a culture without learning all of the different aspects, that feels obvious to me. Like, imagine, some civilization in the future, or aliens coming down to Earth and thinking that they understand all the nuances of humanity, only studying one modality.
Right.
It's
Like if they only studied our telecommunications or our social media, that would be
Right. Oh my
terrifying,
God.
actually.
God
So
forbid. God forbid.
I'm going to bring us back because
Yes.
we talked about how we do this, and
Yes.
our conversation's very alive, but we also are trying to go deeper on certain things, and maybe we're here and haven't left. But this thing about experts and whose scholarship is legitimate was something you asked, and I then asked back, well, why for so many years were clearly racist and patriarchal scholars the ones who were believed? And I'm
Yes.
thinking particularly of from about 100 years ago, turn of the 20th century, anthropologists who reported on different cultures and in such racist and privileged, it's not even the word, just very, very prejudiced ways.
Yeah. Very ethnocentric and
Insulting.
patronizing.
Yes, yes. Calling groups of people savages or
Yes. Yes.
primitive religion, because this person maybe came out of an organized one of the, as they call it, the big three, which we can only hope is changing a little bit, but the three major religions
But
certainly
they're not.
they're not
Like when we
anymore in terms of
let's
numbers.
just say, what are called the three major religions actually are not practiced by as many people in the world as the ones that are dismissed. In fact, oh, I do not remember who invited this shift, but rather than talking about people as minorities, in fact, naming the truth is they're the majority, actually.
Right.
That people of color on the planet are the
Of
majority,
course.
and the religions of non-Western countries are practiced by many more people
Right. Right.
than the big three. It's such
Right.
an ethnocentric
It is.
perspective to call
It
them the
is.
big three,
Yeah. But in any case, these anthropologists came out of those,
right?
principally, I think, Judeo-Christian religion, and
Mhm.
so looked at anything else as, not really talking to God. Come on,
Or not talking to any god who mattered.
right? Or
And
imagining it as only idolatry, especially if
yes,
there were figures involved.
well, and that I think, so again, we talk about whose story, we can talk about this in the context of history, right, as well. Whose story is privileged as the story? And my training and background is in Judaism and the Torah, and so where that text describes other cultures, religions as idolatry, and God in the text says, wipe them out. And did we talk about this last week? I feel like
I don't
maybe,
think so.
um, or I guess we had 2 weeks ago, but this, maybe you talked about it in class, so uh, it's all blending together.
So,
But that when we say like, oh well, where does this idea of diminishing the value of other traditions, religious practices, and deities is, well, if we're talking about Judeo-Christianity, then the source texts say so. They say, I am the one God, all other gods are false and should be destroyed lest you be distracted and misled.
right.
And so when we have, I really appreciate the work of Daniel Hartman and his book, Putting God Second, I think it's called,
Mhm.
where he says this is the problem, is if you put God first and the statements that are attributed to God in the Bible, then we're putting ethics second, and we're not challenging enough what our texts are telling us is okay.
Right.
And I think when we talk about who are the experts, for so long the experts were the ones who could quote that text and who were pressuring, coercing, educating um, those who they had influence over to follow that text in that perspective.
And one of the things to undergird or emphasize that is that in Judaism we have what we call proof texts. So in that very word, it's as if you can prove something that may be completely unprovable simply because you're quoting certain sources, right? And
Yes.
those are a limited range. I would like to call the work of Gimbutas, of Miriam Robbins Dexter, of Vicki Noble, of Judy Grahn for sure, Gerda Lerner, Starhawk. I've called those sacred texts but we could also call them proof texts.
Mhm.
Instead of people, right away going to the position, oh, well, that's just a theory, or we don't know that for sure. We don't know a whole lot of things that
Yes, all of the
standard
things.
experts wrote about, right?
Yes.
Including, and very importantly, timelines,
Right.
which we try to nail down, and which is impossible. I
Right.
just want to call out also William Deaver's work, Did God
Yes.
Have a Wife? Because in there we do have a lot more than we've had in the past, archaeological evidence showing that, for example, Asherah was worshipped by Jews, or by our forefathers, the
Pre
foremothers. So before there was an official formal Judaism, and
pre-Jews,
pre-Jews and
proto-Jews.
proto-Jews. I talk about some of the pre-Judaic goddesses from Mesopotamia and Anatolia and other places in a presentation I recently gave called Ancient Roots, and I'm going to be making that available. I just want to let you know, to members very
Of
soon.
the Lilith Institute. Yay.
Institute. So many. Max Dashu is also an amazing resource. Suppressed Histories Archives. If you don't know her work, look it up. Run. Do not walk to another screen. Maybe not right now, but look up her work, because it is really phenomenal. She has an amazing voice and scholarship, and brings in periods and places in history that we have never heard of. She has a couple of DVDs available, like Women of Power or Woman of Power, and one about shamans, women shamans. And the first shaman was female, by the way, in Mongolia. But anyway, and probably millions of years before, or thousands of years. But many sources out there, and so I think it is a huge mistake for any student to buy into that, there only being this narrow set of respectable, legitimate, what you were terming before, legitimate resources,
Right.
who are considered authorities on their subject.
And let's hone in on that concept of legitimacy for a moment. And when before we recorded, I was talking about, with Devora has been a scholar for a long time, and just has an access to such a wealth of scholarship and of wisdom. And also you have the names of these scholars and your own. I mean, you have access to others, but you've also been a teacher, and you've written your own books, and you've founded institutes and programs. And that is also a kind of expertise that that I think I said something about, like, I'm not that kind of expert. I don't know how to participate in that. And you said, well, you have embodied wisdom and embodied knowledge and intuitive knowledge and intuitive wisdom. And I wanted to raise up that it's for a long time, only academic type wisdom was considered legitimate. So even if we look at how people get jobs in the working world, and the requirement to have an academic degree, and then the privileging of degrees from some schools over others, and the types of information that are available. And we know that academia is a white supremacist patriarchal environment, from, I think, at all levels, except in classrooms, where there are thankfully now more and more teachers that represent much more diversity of experience and wisdom. And also, I believe that we are shifting into a period where we are learning to see and welcome and privilege intuitive and embodied wisdom also as legitimate.
Yes.
And so I appreciate your reflection of that.
Absolutely.
For me, and I also want to raise it up for others who are wrestling with how you know things. If you didn't learn it in a book, if someone didn't say it before you, and you came to that understanding on your own through your intuition, through your ancestors, through past lives, through your experiences, your lived experiences, that is just as legitimate as what you might read in a book that someone else wrote a long time ago or recently.
And for those who doubt that, I would refer you to a couple of other names. Yaya Louisa Tisch, whose work is certainly very embodied, and Carol Christ, who wrote about theology as embodiment, as experience. And she, of blessed memory, she also recently passed, and she was one of the foremothers of the women's spirituality movement. So many, many books out there by her, Carol Christ, in collaboration with her partner of many years, her scholarly partner, Judith Plaskow, Standing Again at Sinai, and other works as well. And Dianne Jenett, who did her work in Kerala, India, and for many, many years, and continues that. and who wrote, for example, a wonderful article called "A Million Shaktis Rising," but who saw firsthand how embodied connection with the divine is. And I think she walked away from every pilgrimage she has done there after witnessing all kinds of very in-depth and lengthy rituals in which it's very clear that certain information is gotten only in ritual, for example, and that is certainly not recognized here.
Yes.
You know,
And I want to name also, like, I'm nodding along while you're saying these names, and I've heard of many of them, but I have not read most of them. So in case you, the viewer, are watching and going, oh my gosh, I feel so intimidated, they have all this scholarship, I want to say, I feel like I'm representing I don't have the scholarship. That's why I get to have these conversations with Devorah, because I want to learn. And I also don't have the energy to read all the books, but it does feel good to know that they're there, and to feel, feel into my growing understanding of the breadth and depth of women's scholarship, and feminist scholarship on all of these issues, where, you may not have known that there are all of these brilliant, intuitive, and learned in all the ways teachers and scholars who have what to offer. And there are courses too, right, where you can study. You have a bunch of, I feel like I've met some of your
Lilith
students.
Institute has a lot of programs and classes now, and we're going to be offering more in the coming year, sometimes co-teaching and sometimes not. But yes, definitely. And we have a speaker series, which you don't actually know all of, but we're now up to 8 events with these speakers. And Judy Grahn, in fact, has agreed to come in on November 7th and talk about Eruptions of Inanna, which is very profound. She's got a chapter comparing the struggles that Inanna, the ancient goddess, went through, comparing them to Job's and his struggles. And that's a very interesting, all of it's very thought-provoking. So I invite you to check out lilithinstitute.com and look at the speaker series lineup. We'll have it more or less finalized by tomorrow, I think, but most of it will be up there earlier than that. I want to also mention Starhawk, because if I haven't already said her name, but an early work of hers called Dreaming the Dark, and she also has done several novels, including The Fifth Sacred Thing,
which I am obsessed with. I could talk about that I've read all of that series, and I feel like they're I'm going to say, very relevant today. Go read them if you want to be she takes you into the darkness and out of it again, and it's very inspiring.
She's very skilled at that. And I bring it up because I think a lot of her works, it's not like they're not academic. They're meant for everybody, for them to be accessible to everybody. And Dreaming the Dark is the one I started to talk about, where she talks about power over, and that being what we live in, and how we should be rather striving for power with, shared power, or most strong of all, power from within. Yeah.
You talked about this in the What Would Lilith Do conversation with Monica. So I'm like, which I just listened to today. So it's all very fresh.
And questioning some of the same paradigms that we're questioning, I just want to say, is Girl God Books.
Yes.
I did an IG Live with Monette Chilson on Tuesday, and Monica Rogers, who we've been referring to, you can find her at Revelation Woman on Instagram. And yeah, a lot of these kinds of conversations happening. And I'm very glad that we're questioning the status quo from the research side, because these things that make us doubt our own knowledge, our own intuition, our own flashes of insight, which you described having, which I described having, are critical to us moving ahead and standing in our power.
Yeah, and I know, one of the texts that is on the reading list for attending Lilith, for the Lilith Fire Circle, is this book, Untamed by Glennon Doyle. And I've just come back to it after a little bit of time away, but she talks about as well about the importance of our dreaming and of our intuition, and that in fact, look, we can only create a world that is like the world of the past if the only resources we have are the resources we've had in the past.
Right.
It's another way of saying that is, you can't go ahead.
You can't dismantle, I'm going to say it wrong now. You can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools.
Right, exactly.
Thank you, Audre Lorde. And I'm putting
exactly. Yes,
in the comments as well, because that essay, many of her fabulous essays are in a small book called Sister Outsider. Also, Audre Lorde of blessed memory. I wish I had known her and been able to sit in her classroom. But there are many good points she brings up. And another one of them is, your silence will not protect you.
Right. Okay, that brings up a whole other kettle of fish that I can't get into today. But to come back to this idea of our intuition, and our embodied wisdom and our imaginative wisdom. So those flashes of insight and the new ideas, and then we have this well, no one has done this before, no one has tried this before. But that's the thing, is that's what the world needs right now, is ideas that have never, like ideas that are new for today, ideas that have never been tried before, because we're trying to create a world that is different.
Right.
We are trying to, well, I was going to say heal the world, but actually what we want is to evolve it. And in order to do that, we need innovation, and the books are a piece of it. I don't want to dismiss the value of all of the work that's been done. In fact, I think, especially in the context of this conversation, we need to be seeking out the writers and the scholars who weren't included in the canon,
right.
Because the voices that were included in the canon got us into this trouble. So let's unearth and raise up the voices that we haven't been listening to, and the writings that have been here. It's like Mary Magdalene, her writings were literally buried until the 1950s. 1950s. Like, we just think about, like, right. She wrote after Jesus died, according to these writings. And Megan Watterson has this incredible book about this, Mary Magdalene Revealed. And when we think about, like, using her as one example of the many people of marginalized genders, women and other non-men, who, I want to also, like, just raise up trans and queer voices that have been buried as well. And of course, the voices of people of color from around the world. And we here in the Western, I don't know what else to call this, but I'm in Canada, Devorah is in the US. We need to be learning more from those texts and listening more to those folks, and also listening more to ourselves, and privileging more that internal, the knowledge that comes from the inside out, that is a culmination of experience, expertise, wisdom, intuition.
And I just want to add one thing to that, which is those times when you have an aha moment and you think, oh, that's not important, or, oh, I must be crazy, whoever thought of that. So those have been accompanying some of my best ideas. And one of those, I think, was the concept of theology as a methodology for one's academic research. Wow. And that just hit me like a bolt of lightning one day as I was walking in the midst of writing my dissertation. So, and I asked myself for days. I even checked in with a friend who was sort of being my check-in buddy for the dissertation every week to make sure I was staying with the work and, not getting overwhelmed, which I highly recommend, having such a person, an in-shipper, shepherding you. And I said, am I crazy? I mean, can I really say this? Has somebody already done this? It's exactly what I was doing. And I didn't find it anywhere, oddly enough. There were kind of variations, but yeah, so that's one example.
Yeah, and I will want to, please make note, I will want to know more about that. Theology as methodology. Yeah, these flashes of insight, or the moments when we shift gears or try something we've never tried before, those are moments that can lead to such generative creativity, and I don't know how, like, I don't want to get too attached to a product, but the outcome of those creatively generative moments just lead us to places we've never been before, and that's what we need.
Yeah, that opens the room for exploration.
Right.
I just want to say one more thing about research, because we've touched on that before we went on air and during this. There's a book called Decolonizing Methodologies,
Mhm.
And there are a number of really good works now out on indigenous research methods. And I would, if you're a student, I definitely recommend looking those up because it gives you a whole other view. We've been discussing some other views as well, but another view of research. And I just want to also mention again Dianne Jenett's name because she and three other women came up with something called organic inquiry, treating research
Mm.
as if it were sacred some years ago. And that was also a whole different and very embodied mindset. So we'll put that in the notes as well for today.
Amazing. I feel like we are probably coming to close, and on this topic of who are the experts, I just feel like I really want to say we are. And we are the experts, and we have a tendency, especially women, to divert our attention when we're looking for expertise. We look outside of us, and I really want to remind ourselves and remind all of you to think of yourself, to think of ourselves as experts, and tune into our knowing, our embodied knowing, our emotional knowing, our intuitive knowing. When we come to a crossroads, when we're feeling stuck, when we want guidance, we can ask, we can get quiet and tune in and turn in and ask that inner knowing first.
Yes.
And then, like what happened with you, Devor, where you had that, that flash of insight about theology as methodology, and you went looking, wait, I don't have to reinvent the wheel if this has already been done. That's great. Like maybe you'll find collaborators, maybe you'll find a path, that has already been hacked through,
Right.
and maybe not. And then you need collaborators to support you in the hacking.
Right. Right. But yeah, to start there, I think that's a wonderful piece of advice. It makes me want to conclude with the line, "We are the ones we've been waiting for."
Ooh.
And we might have to add that on to the end of the segments because Melissa Etheridge, I believe, sang that beautifully.
Oh, and also, I love the song by Mom Muse, "We Shall Be Known,"
Mm.
and we'll put a link, or yes, I
Yeah,
guess I can put a
good
link, and
idea.
I'm happy to sing. I sing it on my Instagram. You can go check it out in my highlights, like in the saved highlights on my Instagram.
Okay.
I covered it there. I love that song. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circled around to tend these fires. And there's a way in which I love that song because it both calls us in as, as the experts, as the ones we've been waiting for, and also names that we are in good company. And I believe the key in this new paradigm is to never do it alone. It's, figure out, and you were just talking about this with Minette Chilson about women collaborating rather than competing, and how we need to be looking for our collaborators, building our teams, building our circles. That both of those songs, both of those quotes speak to that very well for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true because right now, especially, isolating is the worst thing we can do, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is true. And
So,
yeah,
yeah, I'm happy.
on that note.
Yes, I'm happy for this collaboration and all the ones that we're both doing.
Mhm.
Yes, on that note, do you have a closing something?
um, I want to, if you'll permit me, I'll close with the last line from "We Shall Be Known."
Yes.
It is time now. It is time now that we rise. What is it? It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love.
Beautiful. I almost asked you to sing, so thank you.
There we go.
All
More
right.
of that. All right. Well, take care, and we'll see you next time on Tending Lilith's Fire.
Be well.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.